Greetings all! Today, we are going to take a special look at the poison type and analyze its attributes, the Pokemon assigned to the type, and how it functions from a combative standpoint. While it might be hated for its dangerous effects and the threat it poses to most forms of life, humans included, the poison type is nonetheless a powerful type that can more than make up for its limitations by incapacitating almost all that fall under its effects and slowly draining their life away. The Pokemon that fall under the type may not be the strongest of creatures on their own, but with toxins in hand, these monsters can often be a challenge to defeat, and ultimately prove to be a vile threat to have to win a battle of attrition against. Trainers that wish to invest in the type will often have to keep clear of their own Pokemon for the sake of their own safety, but that only serves to make them that much more of a problem for any opposition that has to go up against their toxic forms and powers without the right protection to counter them. The poison type is perhaps one of the most infamous for its devastating effects on the bodies of others, and the sheer number of ways it can be used to make life a living nightmare for those that aren't naturally protected against attacks of the type. Much as its name might suggest, the name of the game for the poison type is using chemicals to alter the way in which the bodies of others operate, oftentimes altering or shutting down bodily systems and producing a myriad array of effects in order to incapacitate and kill other life forms. While some poisons are only mildly dangerous and may only cause minor harm or sickness at the most, others can be quite lethal and so fast-acting that there often might not be enough time to save someone if they are exposed to high enough concentrations of a specific poison. The extreme diversity of poisons that exist in nature further compounds this problem, and while powerful antidotes have been developed for Pokemon that can cure a wide range of poison states, the same cannot be said for humans, leaving them more vulnerable to the effects of these toxins than others. The poison type, not surprisingly, is the originator of the poisoned and badly poisoned status conditions, and both can prove to be dangerous to a Pokemon if left untreated, especially in the latter case as the damage dealt by the condition will only grow with time. As far as offensive use of this type goes, most physical attacks involve the striking of opponents with some sort of physical object coated in poison, whether it be a limb or something else external. Special attacks of the type, on the other hand, generally involve intoxicating life forms through the use of concentrated sources of poison, such as toxic gas, sludge, and acid, and can have horrific biological effects that can not only cause severe damage, but potentially scar opponents for life, making them some of the most vile moves to face off against, even if they might not always be extremely powerful. Just as Mother Nature is able to produce an extremely high number of different poisons with which to horribly affect others with, the Pokemon that are assigned to the poison type come in an extreme variety of forms, ranging from insectoids to reptiles, aquatic organisms, mammals, and many more, with some even having forms that are so bizarre and abnormal that they cannot easily be classified, possessing bodies that are so steeped in poison that their entire anatomy is designed for the purpose of delivering those toxins in sometimes lethal concentrations. This can make it very difficult to appropriately plan out a strategy to use against these creatures, as while their toxic powers might be something that can be planned for, any other partial type they might have can bring with it a host of other skills and moves that can make them more of a threat, in turn helping the poison type to be one of the hardest to plan for completely, even if it might not be the most prolific of types. In due part to the varied forms that poison-type Pokemon take, the overall degree of move variety accessible to the type is fairly large, and the Pokemon that are assigned to the type themselves can possess a decent degree of move variety on their own end, depending on whether or not they have another type assigned to them. In cases where poison is the primary method of attack for a Pokemon assigned to the type, the moves that the Pokemon learn naturally outside of the poison type tend to be limited to either those associated with another partial type assignment or, in the case of pure poison types, exist primarily as basic normal type attacks. Those that are poison types of a secondary nature, however, are generally better equipped as a whole, either because their primary type overrides their toxic attributes, or because they only use their toxins as a secondary form of offense and defense, opening up their primary type to a host of other attack types to pull from. As such, the move variety of the type is very much dependent on the type of Pokemon examined under it, and can certainly be used to surprise opponents that are unaware of what other powers these creatures can bring to the battlefield outside of their poisonous features. In terms of stat averages for the poison type, the type shows below average performance in all 6 main stats, and is thus statistically one of the less useful types. But this is primarily due to the fact that the Pokemon assigned to the type generally rely on the power of their toxins and not their overall stats to defeat others in a confrontation. In particular, this type shows weakness in its HP, defense, and speed stats, which is not wholly surprising. Poison types generally do not have a lot of stamina due to much of it being utilized to produce poison. Their bodies tend to be more physically frail due to a lack of need for strong physical defenses, lest others risk contact with abilities like Poison Point, and they usually don't have to rely on speed too much, as their toxins can often readily immobilize their prey anyways. As far as its strengths go, the type's other 3 stats are very close to each other, so they just about even out. But its highest stat, its attack stat, does make sense since many poison types will utilize their body as a direct weapon to inject their toxins into others, even if it only means so much as making direct physical contact with them, as seen in the Poison Touch ability. As such, though its constituents might not have the greatest of stats as a whole, the poison type and the Pokemon assigned to it have ways to get around this and make themselves severe threats even in the face of statistically more powerful Pokemon. Currently, there are 66 recognized types of Poison-type Pokemon, 16 of them being pure Poison types, and the remaining 50 of them being dual types, not including the Alolan variants of Grimer and Muck. Additionally, 18 of the dual types are primary Poison types, while the remaining 32 are secondary Poison types. They are broken down into the following categories. Amorphous life forms. These creatures are difficult to classify biologically, as their bodily structures are so unique and abnormal that they really have no other close relatives on the tree of life. These creatures have bodily forms made out of toxic sludge, gelatinous flesh, garbage, and other disgusting materials, and their general anatomy makes little sense from a macroscopic perspective. As a whole, though, these creatures tend to be among the vilest of poison types and are usually a walking hazard to all other forms of nearby life, making them a severe biological threat to have to encounter on any day. Insectoids. These Pokemon are unified by the fact that they are all insectoids, and have naturally developed the power to use poison as their primary form of direct offense and a tool of survival, poisoning prey items and opponents alike, and letting the toxins weaken them enough for these creatures to finish them off easily. Unfortunately, in many cases, outside of their primary bug-type offenses, these creatures may rely on these toxins to the point where they are relatively powerless without them against stronger opponents, though a few, like the members of the Venonat family and Dustox, have developed secondary powers that allow them to readily deal damage through other means in emergency situations. Cocoons. Unlike other cocoon Pokemon, Kakuna and Whirlipede can still rely on toxins to defend themselves with while they await evolution, though the manner in which they do so is notably different. In the case of Kakuna, while they are almost completely immobile in their cocoon state, they can still extend a poisonous stinger from the tip of their lower end, using it to strike with poison sting attacks. Whirlipede, on the other hand, only use their toxins as a last resort, preferring to use their own bodies as blunt instruments of destruction, and paying for their activity going forward by having to wait a long time to finally evolve into their adult form. Arachnid morphs. These Pokemon are unified by the fact that they are all related to arachnids, only missing the true definition of the group as a result of an incorrect number of limbs. Much like insectoid poison types, these creatures generally rely on powerful toxins as their primary means of incapacitating and killing other organisms, usually through a direct bite or through the use of poisonous stingers. The only real exception to this is Drapion, as they can readily supplement their poisons with surprising physical strength. Plants and fungi. These creatures are unified by the fact that they are either fully or at least partially plant-based and/or fungal organisms that rely on light and photosynthesis in order to produce the energy they need to live. Since grass types as a whole tend to be highly susceptible to the effects of toxins, some grass types have developed the ability to produce their own toxins as their primary form of defense, a way of easily subduing prey, and a form of protection against the toxic nature of other life forms. They generally do not gain much in the way of direct poison-type offenses outside of acid-based attacks, but they tend to learn a lot of status-inflicting moves in order to help them incapacitate others before they make use of their primary plant-based powers to finish them off readily. Aquatic organisms. These creatures are unified by the fact that they primarily live in the water, with their poisonous natures existing as both a defense against attack and a method for readily incapacitating prey items. The members of the tentacled family possess toxic stingers as seen in other types of jellyfish, and normally rely on them when catching prey, though they can mix their toxins with water to utilize the devastating sludge wave attack late in life. Quillfish are related to blowfish and inherit from them toxic meat, additionally having the stingers on their outer skin filled with a potent poison that can quickly immobilize anything they prick. The members of the scrope family develop their ability to produce toxins as a result of disguising themselves to look like rotten kelp, with the poisons in them being present to make them taste like rotting kelp as part of their disguise. The members of the Marini family use their toxins primarily for predatory purposes, utilizing their toxins to immobilize prey items while these starfish slowly devour their meal, though their signature baneful bunker technique can also put their poisons to use in a defensive state and make it a dangerous idea to make direct contact with them. Reptiles. These creatures are unified by the fact that they are all reptiles that rely on their toxins to immobilize both prey and potential predators alike, though mainly prey, and are able to combine their toxic nature with terrifying visages that can immobilize weaker Pokémon easily with merely a single, stark glare, sometimes even in the form of an actual glare technique. While they sometimes might need this fear in order to give them enough time to make use of their toxins in close quarters, lacking severely powerful offenses outside of their toxic nature in some cases, they all have something to offer that makes them a threat even without their toxins. For the members of the Ekans family, it's their powerful rap attack. For Seviper, it's their sharp, bladed tail. And for the members of the Salandit family, it's their natural access to fire-type attacks, and in turn, the ability to scorch their opponent if they cannot be easily taken down with poison alone. Ground-based mammals. These Pokémon are unified by the fact that they are mammals that primarily live on the ground, and the development of internal poisons is notably unique to them, as mammals are among the few types of creatures that normally do not have the ability to produce notable poisons in their own bodies. In the case of the Stunky family, the power to generate and utilize poison for offense is likely a byproduct of their ability to produce the nose-turning, horrifically bad-smelling liquid they spray on others for both offensive and defensive purposes. For the members of the Nidoran families, however, the power to produce poison is one that was primarily developed as a form of defense against predators, as only the fully evolved forms of these families, Nidoking and Nidoqueen, are generally seen as being armored and strong enough to deal considerable physical trauma to, and in turn fend off, anything that would dare to attack them without them having to rely on their poisonous natures to escape said confrontations alive. Air-based mammals. This special category is reserved for the members of the Zubat family, as while these creatures are still classified as mammals, they are distinctly different from the previous category in that they have the capacity to fly, and do so as part of their natural lifestyle. Their access to poison-type attacks is primarily defensive and predatory in nature, using their toxins to slowly incapacitate others so they may feed on them in peace with little struggle, as they generally have poor defenses and have to rely on attacks like Poison Fang and Cross Poison in conjunction with their deceptive speed in order to get the drop on opponents and prey items alike. amphibians. This special category is reserved for the members of the croagunk family, and while they might not have poison-laden meat like some types of frog, these creatures are able to use a direct injection system in their arms to coat their fingers in toxic liquid to increase the damaging power of their physical attacks. This means that they generally will only rely on their toxins as a backup weapon in the wild, but in battle, it can prove to be especially nasty when utilized to deliver powerful poison jab attacks in close quarters. Ghosts. This special category is reserved for the members of the ghastly family, as they are the only ghost types known that actually build their corporeal form out of toxic gas. Though they are unable to naturally learn any poison type attacks on their own under normal circumstances, they can still use the toxic gas comprising their bodies to smother and lethally poison anything that breathes it in, making them a dire threat when in the form of ghastly or haunter. While Gengar and its mega-evolved form are unable to do this as effectively because of their generally solid corporeal form, they still retain the toxic bodily properties of their pre-evolutions, and can in turn prove to be a dangerous threat when taught poison-type moves through artificial means. Ultra Beasts. This special category is reserved for Nihilego, Poipole, and Naganadel, 3 of the extra-universal entities known as the Ultra Beasts. While these creatures are all unified in that they naturally produce potent toxins as a tool of survival, the type of poison and the function it specifically serves is different between these creatures. Nihilego produce a powerful neurotoxin that has the effect of heightening the special skills and natural abilities of those that are infected by it, but it also slowly drives them to protect Nihilego in their own way in order to keep the species safe from attack by larger life forms. Poipole and Naganadel, on the other hand, primarily generate tissue-destroying toxins that they douse their prey with, letting the poisons both glue them to the ground and immobilize them as they seep through their skin and induce horrible toxic shock within seconds, eventually killing them so these monsters can readily feast on their remains. This makes all 3 of these creatures incredibly dangerous to go up against, and definitely not forces to be reckoned with under any circumstances without severe protection against their toxic powers. In looking at the poison type's advantages and disadvantages in battle, in terms of offense, the poison type has 2 advantages, 4 disadvantages, and 1 negative immunity. The type is at an advantage against the grass type because the bodies of many grass type Pokemon tend to lack strong immune systems as a result of their simple biological forms, rendering them extremely weak to the effects of toxins introduced into their bodily systems. The fact that some grass types are poison types as well helps to negate this somewhat though, and is the result of them having a developed resistance against the types of toxins that they themselves are capable of generating, so not all basic plant-based Pokemon are noted to possess this vulnerability. The type is at an advantage against the Fairy type, as Fairy-type Pokemon have mostly developed their bodies in areas that are relatively clean of toxins or otherwise have physical forms that prevent them from easily being infected with disease. While this may seem counterintuitive to their weakness, the effects of being isolated in birth to these areas has resulted in these creatures not needing to develop a strong immune system of any sort, and as a result, they do not have the biological systems needed to fend off toxins when directly attacked with them, in turn taking severe damage from attacks of this type. The type is at a disadvantage against the poison type, as most poison type Pokemon naturally build up a resistance against their own toxins in constantly manufacturing them, and thus tend to have built-in biological defenses against the toxins of others, sometimes to the point of thriving in the presence of toxins from outside sources. The type is at a disadvantage against the ground type, as these creatures tend to possess bodies with skin or hide that is designed to create a barrier between them and the outside world that protects them from biological toxins. Though seemingly counterintuitive, being dirty is actually a good thing in this case, as it creates a physical barrier to pathogens and toxins in general that keeps them from easily seeping through skin and hide to do harm to ground types, reducing the amount of poison that actually enters into their systems, and in turn weakening the damage of poison-type attacks as a whole. The type is at a disadvantage against the rock type, as rocky armor is generally solid and much less porous than normal skin and hide, only being broken down readily by the physical and chemical actions of elements such as water. Without a way for poison to easily seep through into the internal systems of these Pokémon, the type's overall impact is reduced, and the damaging power of its associated attacks are in turn severely hampered. The type is at a disadvantage against the ghost type, because poisons generally only work effectively against the living, not the dead or supernatural. It makes little biological sense for poisons to readily affect ghosts and similar creatures with ghost-type attributes when there is generally a lack of living tissue to actually infect and poison, in turn reducing the damaging power of poison-type attacks against these spectral entities. Lastly, the type has no effect against steel types, as these Pokémon are covered with some form of metallic armor that is almost completely impermeable to liquids of all types. While this does not reduce the damage they are dealt from the actions of water-type moves, it does have the effect of preventing anything contained within liquids from seeping into the bodies of those possessing said armor. As a result, there is no way for toxins contained in liquids or even solids of any sort to enter into the bodies of Pokémon that possess metallic armor, making them immune to the damaging effects of poison-type attacks under all normal circumstances. Defensively speaking, the poison type has 5 resistances, 2 weaknesses, and no immunities. The type is resistant against the fighting type because of 2 primary reasons. For one thing, a lot of poison types possess abnormal body forms that are more resilient and capable of absorbing the energy of fighting type attacks, so the blows are often softened a bit in that regard. Secondly, there is a level of fear associated with the poison type, as even the strongest of fighters can be weakened and downed with simple poison, making it less likely that Pokémon using fighting type moves will be delivering them with the same force as normal if they are afraid that contact will result in them being weakened in a way that is beyond their biological control. The type is resistant against the poison type because, as previously mentioned, most poison type Pokémon naturally have a resistance against their own toxins from constantly manufacturing them, and thus tend to have built-in biological defenses against the toxins of others or even thrive in them. The type is resistant against the bug type because the internal toxins of certain bug types have the effect of bolstering the systems of poison types and thus have little effect on them. Moreover, most bug-type attacks have a hard time penetrating the physical forms of many poison types for reasons that are still being studied, in turn granting the type a natural resistance against damage from moves assigned to the bug type. The type is resistant against the grass type because the generally primitive and weak immune systems of grass types make them wary of going near anything that may potentially infect them and damage their health in a way they cannot easily recover from. So they are less likely to attack with full force in order to avoid close contact as much as possible, with the poison type additionally possessing a natural capacity to dissipate the energy-based nature of certain grass-type attacks and weaken them in that way. The type is resistant against the fairy type because, much as with the grass type, the frail immune systems of fairy type Pokémon render them highly vulnerable to the toxic effects of poison type attacks. As a result, they are unlikely to use their full power when attacking to avoid risking the need to even go near poison types, and the fairy force energy used in fairy type special attacks, for some reason, is also readily dissipated by the toxic properties of poison types, leaving it equally ineffective in that regard. The type is weak against the ground type because, while poison types are generally resistant against their own kinds of attacks because of the toxic concoctions their bodies naturally produce, many species in turn possess volatile chemicals within their poisons that can be disturbed by seismic activity or the application of ground-based substances as projectile attacks. If disturbed, these volatile compounds can ignite or otherwise be triggered in a manner that can cause severe physical damage to a poison type's internal organs and interior structure, in turn amplifying the damage done to them by ground-type attacks to the point of being potentially lethal. Lastly, the type is weak against the Psychic type quite infamously for the same reasons as the ground type. While ground types generally must rely on seismic waves or ground-based projectiles to trigger volatile chemicals inside of a poison-type opponent, Psychic types can use their psychokinetic power to trigger these chemicals from afar or with close-quarter strikes charged with psychic energy, dealing severe damage to the target in the process and potentially dealing lethal damage in the worst of cases. As far as using the poison type in battle goes, it can definitely be said that strategy will be needed in order to make any serious use of the type. But if it can be done, its effects can be truly devastating. Unfortunately for the type, it is considered statistically to be among the weakest of all known types, only outdone by the bug type, and the Pokemon that are a part of it are not always among the strongest of fighters. This is mainly due to the fact that these creatures may only rely on their toxins to defend themselves with, so it can be understood to be just a part of how they are designed biologically. But regardless, their overall reliance on the type can be a problem. There are many types that can resist the effects of the poison type, and very few that are truly weak to it, and poison types as a whole are hampered by sometimes having a limited move pool to work with outside of their poison type attributes. Moreover, they can be completely halted by steel types, which are completely immune to the damaging effects of poison type attacks, and can in turn wall them and their offenses completely off. However, even with all of that said, the poison type is still quite infamous, as it not only is great defensively, only being weak to two different types, but it's the reason why the move Toxic is so rightfully feared, as are the poisoned and badly poisoned status conditions as a whole when used to supplement the offenses of a Pokemon. These types of moves and conditions require strategy to use effectively, but the near limitless pool of Pokemon that can get access to Toxic via artificial means leave many ways to make effective use of it. In addition, the type is only one of two that can be used to readily take down fairy types, which are notorious for their abnormal powers and ability to decimate opponents that are not used to their style of battling and elemental attributes, and they are further immune to being poisoned and badly poisoned and can remove toxic spikes from a battlefield. There might not be a large number of poison-type Pokemon out there compared to some other types, but the devastating effects that the type can have on one's body are not to be ignored. They might require one to go beyond basic offense and use complex strategies in order to make the most of their toxic powers, but as long as the opposition isn't highly resistant or completely immune to the power of this type, there is little doubt that it can make a huge impact in battle in the long term, and prove to be a terrifying force to behold if allowed to wreak havoc on the bodies of the opposition's Pokemon unchecked. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description.
Yeah, no.
With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.